Good morning and welcome to Psychological Professions Week 2023. It's great to be kicking off the week. My name's Adrian Whittington. I'm National Clinical Lead for Psychological Professions at NHSEngland. And this is the beginning of a week of fantastic events that are happening around the country in local areas, but also remote and in-person events that are organised through the Psychological Professions networks. So welcome to today's session. Today we're going to be focused on equality, diversity and inclusion in the psychological professions and what is next. And it's really important that we're kicking off the week with this session because this remains an absolute area of focus for the psychological professions and needs to remain so. And I'm delighted to be joined by a glittering cast today of experts in this field. It remains central to our mission. If we're going to have a more psychological NHS, we're going to need to do so in a way that meets all of our population needs, and that's why this has to be a single-minded focus. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll just take you through how we're planning to run the session today. I'm going to kick us off with Navina Evans, who's Chief Workforce Training and Education Officer at NHSEngland, and then I'll be handing over to Sharon and Margo, Paul, Estelle to take us through the rest of the session. And there's really going to be two pieces of work that we're going to focus on. The first is how the psychological professions networks, and I'll say a bit more in a minute about what those are, have developed a position on equity, diversity and inclusion. And then the second area is work that Margo and Paul and others have been doing in the Southeast particularly, but it has national ramifications, looking at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats around where we are with EDI, and also developing a toolkit for EDI, which I think can be quite influential. So I'm delighted now to pass over to Navina Evans. Navina is Chief Workforce Training and Education Officer at NHSEngland, and Navina is going to launch the week for us.
Hello, my name is Navina Evans, Chief Workforce Training and Education Officer here at NHSEngland. I'd really like to extend a warm welcome to Psychological Professions Week. It's a great opportunity to celebrate everything brilliant that you guys do. I am myself a psychiatrist by profession, so all of my working life I have had the pleasure and the privilege of working with many from the psychological professions, and it's also important to remind ourselves that it's about expanding the workforce within and beyond mental health. So it's great that you're spending some time now thinking about the professions and thinking about what you need to do as we go forward into the future of health and care. I'd like to ask you to please pay attention to two really important pieces of work that we're moving into. One is the EDI improvement plan, which is a really important part of the next stage for how we make sure we embed diversity, equity, inclusion in the work that we do, not just for reducing health inequalities, but for making sure that we support all of our staff to give the best of themselves so that they can then make sure they deliver good outcomes for the people we serve. It's never been so important as I think it is now to make sure that we focus on that connection between equity, diversity, inclusion, productivity and outcomes for our populations. So I'm sure you're going to have an exciting session today. I hope that you really come up with lots of great ideas. I'd love to hear the outcomes of the sessions and the work that you're doing. I understand that you'll be launching your position statement as well as a toolkit for taking this agenda forward. So it's great to be working together as we move into the next phase. Finally, I do want to mention our long-term workforce plan, where again, we look at how we retain, we grow, and we do reform in our health service to make sure that we are a community of staff that are fit for the future. So once again, please take a look at that as well. And I hope that you can embed that in the work that you do. Big ask there. Have a great day.
Huge thanks to Navina. That's a fantastic introduction and huge thanks to Navina. So why focus on equality, diversity and inclusion? I'm just going to set the scene quite briefly. And while I do that, I just want to draw your attention also to the opportunity to ask any questions that you would like to. For the people who are speaking today, you can post those into the Q&A. And also that there's a link within the Q&A, if you click on that that button for a Mentimeter question as well, where we can also hear from you. So please do use both of those opportunities to engage during the session. So why focus on EDI? Because we need the best possible outcomes for all, because we need a workforce that's inclusive, representative and free of discrimination. I'm going to set out two sort of reasons that I think are particularly important. One is focusing on EDI makes a difference, and I hope to give a message of some hope around that, although also highlighting how much further we have to go. And secondly, that it's our legal duty to focus on EDI, and aligned to a number of sort of NHS policy areas that are very important. So I am going to focus on ethnicity during this intro, but of course all of our work on equality, diversity and inclusion needs to be across the protected characteristics and beyond. And so our hope is that this can be a session today that draws us into thinking about EDI in that broader sense. I am using two ethnicity focused examples though. So if we can go to the next slide. So the first reason why I think this focus is really important is because it can make a huge difference. And I'm showing you on this slide evidence of that. So this slide shows outcomes for patients of different ethnicities accessing NHS talking therapies services for anxiety and depression. And the slide shows recovery rates by specific ethnic groups. The blue bars are the recovery rates as they were in 2015-16, and the grey bars are the recovery rates as they were in 2021-22, which is the most recent annual report that we have on this data. And the reason I'm focusing on NHS talking therapies is not because it's the most important service, it's very important, but many other services are important too, but because we have excellent data. So this also illustrates really how data can help us. So what you'll see when you look at this graph is that outcomes have improved for all ethnicities over this period of time. You'll also see that they've improved the most for ethnic minority groups, and that we now have several ethnic minority groups achieving the recovery outcome target, as are the white groups. However, it also shows that there's still a long way to go, and that we have some specific ethnic groups accessing NHS talking therapies who still aren't offered a service that enables them to achieve the outcomes that we would like to support them with. And I draw attention particularly to the sort of Bangladeshi and Pakistani populations here. But I think what this and the other sort of factor that needs to be really sort of highlighted here is that there are significant local and regional variations. So although we can look at this national data and it tells us a story, we also need to really dig into our local data. For example, there are sort of some areas where some ethnicities are faring significantly worse. There's a large urban area where the Bangladeshi population outcome metric shows 29% recovery, for example, which is clearly not where we want to be. So I think this highlights we can make progress. We have made progress in a number of areas through focus on EDI, but also that there's still a long way to go to achieve equity and equality. So if we go to the next slide, how have we got there in terms of this progress so far? Well, one of the methods is that a lot of very dedicated people have been implementing the positive practice guide for Black and minority Asian service users, ethnic minority service users within NHS talking therapies. This is the front cover of that guide. You can access this on the BABCP website. And so through focus, through a specific sort of methodology and a tool that lots of people have been engaged around, lots of people have been taking forward work within individual services, we've seen this progress. So it's a huge thank you to those who've supported that progress, but also to highlight, of course, we've got a lot further to go. Okay, if we go to the next slide, I'm going to now focus in on a second area that illustrates really the same point. We can make a difference by focus on EDI. And this slide shows the sort of rates of ethnic minority and ethnicity representation in those coming into clinical psychology training, an area where we know we've had a historical problem. So I'll take you through this briefly. If we start at the left-hand side here, the left-hand side bar shows the England and Wales, the psychologists, applied psychologist population within NHS services in several years ago. And then the more recent data on this showing a significant but small change in the ethnic minority representation. So you can see there that over several years we have seen a growth in ethnic minority inclusion within clinical psychology posts in the NHS. But then the third bar shows us where we would be if we were truly representative of the ethnic mix of the England working age population. So we're clearly not where we would need to be to have a representative applied psychology workforce for a qualified applied psychologists. The fourth bar shows the ethnic mix of undergraduate psychologists. So this is effectively the pool from which clinical psychologists apply, often after gaining further experience. And what you'll see is that the pool of undergraduate psychologists is actually quite close to the ethnic mix of the England working age population. So the pool is actually about what we would expect it to be, but the applied psychology workforce isn't there yet. But then the right-hand four bars on this chart show how things have changed within the entrance to clinical psychology training over the past 4 years. And you'll see there's been really a steady growth in the representation of ethnic minority candidates coming into clinical psychology training, such that in the most recent year where we have data, we can see that there's actually quite a close match now between the ethnic mix of those entering clinical psychology doctorates and both the undergraduate psychologist population and the England and Wales population for working age adults. So this shows, I think, how focus can have an impact. There's been significant sort of work done within the clinical psychology training courses to tackle the issue that was there for many years, and it's showing it's bearing some fruit. But I think what this shows us too is that we're not where we would like to be in terms of representation. And of course, I must say representation is not the whole story in terms of inclusion, of course. We need a representative workforce, but we also need a workforce that is truly inclusive of all who are within it and that are able to respond to the whole population need. Okay, so those are two examples, I think, showing we can make progress, we've got further to go, and we still need to do more. We move on to the next slide. The second area I wanted to pick up was that we have a legal duty to focus on EDI. A public sector equality duty from 2011 is that any public sector organisation needs to focus on eliminating discrimination, harassment and victimisation. It needs to advance equality of opportunity across protected characteristics, and it needs to foster good relations between persons across protected characteristics. And so I think, as you've seen in the two examples I've shown, we do have more to do to advance equality of opportunity in ethnicity within our workforce and in our outcomes for patients from psychological ways of working. And we have a duty to tackle that actually under the law. And there are a number of sort of NHS policy developments that align very closely to this. So one Navina referred to, which was the NHS Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Improvement Plan. Do have a look at that. It's got some specific commitments for the whole NHS in how it aims to deliver on its public sector equality duty, and it aligns to some of the work we're talking about today. And the Patient and Carer Race Equality Framework, which was published just a couple of weeks ago. I'd really draw your attention to this. It's a fantastic framework that can help our services for mental health specifically to drive forward in terms of race equality. And some very important sort of commitments and areas there that people can draw on. Okay, so I think you've seen that there's both a moral, I believe, and a sort of legal duty to tackle equality, diversity and inclusion issues. And we can also make progress, but we've got further to go. So if we go to the next slide, you're going to be hearing in the rest of today's session about work that the Psychological Professions Networks have been doing on this. And so I thought it would be helpful for you to just know what the Psychological Professions Networks are in case you're not familiar. So it's a multidisciplinary professional network bringing together psychological professionals and other stakeholders, all of whom are involved in NHS commissioned psychological healthcare. And the purpose really is to maximise the benefits of the psychological professions for the public. So if we go to the next slide, these are commissioned by NHSEngland and effectively across each of the 7 regions in the English NHS, they provide professional leadership for the psychological professions. But in a way that brings together all the major stakeholders. So they bring together psychological professionals and membership networks you can join. So if you're not a member, please do join. They bring together policymakers, they bring together members of the public so that we can all move this agenda forward together. Go to the next slide. This was a number of members of the PPN teams back in the summer. This is a more human way of showing who the psychological professions networks are. These are just the sort of core teams, but of course we have, I think, about 15,000 members. So these are some of the individuals who've been working on this agenda. So it's a great pleasure now to hand over to Sharon Prince, who's been one of those leading some specific work on this with others. And Sharon's going to be talking about the position paper and call to action that the PPNs have developed. So thank you very much. Sharon, over to you.
Thank you, Adrian. Good morning, everybody. It's really great to be here to talk to you this morning about the PPN position statement on equity, diversity and inclusion. Before we start, some of you may have noticed the difference between the title of the session and the title of the position statement. We've deliberately framed the statement to centre around equity. There is a difference, and what I thought I'd do is show a bit of a film to kind of explain the difference between equality and equity. Could we show the film, please?
Before we can talk about equity versus equality, I want to first define diversity. At Inclusive Communities, we like to say diversity in its simplest definition means differences. We all have differences, from our glasses to our weight to how much money we have. That is diversity, and no matter how much people say it's hard to find diversity, that's not true. Diversity exists. It's about taking the time to acknowledge its existence and work to ensure action is taken to embrace these differences, not alienate them. Equality is often equated to fairness and sameness, and is based in the misconception that we all have the same needs and the same solution will work for everyone. Equity is based in access and opportunity, with the understanding that we each start with different advantages and disadvantages, and thus have different needs to attain access and opportunity. To understand equity, we have to compare it to equality. Now, I love this equity versus equality graphic, as it's the best explanation of the difference between the two. On the equality side, you see that we've got 3 individuals, our tall guy, our short girl, and our friend in the wheelchair. And you see that they're all trying to watch this baseball game, but there's this fence. With equality, they've each been given a box to use to be able to see the game. But obviously that's not working, because our tall friend is now super tall and sees very clearly over the fence, while our short girl can just barely see, and she's still kind of on her tiptoes and struggling to see the game, while the person in the wheelchair can't see at all and they can't even get on the box. On the equity side of this picture, you can see that now we've given each individual exactly what they need to be able to see the game. The person in the wheelchair has a ramp, so they can clearly get to the top and see the full game. The shorter girl has 2 boxes, which is what she needed to comfortably be able to see, and the tall person has no boxes at all because they didn't need the extra assistance in the first place. Equity is a process, which means it is continuous. We can't gain equity by changing just one thing. For example, the equity side of this photo shows our friend in the wheelchair has gained equity at this fence. But the work is not done. True progressive equity is about how can we ensure that he has equitable opportunities at all of the hypothetical and real fences in his life. Equity requires power, resources, and social responsibility to work hand in hand to change the structures and provide opportunities to those who were institutionally left out, marginalized, or oppressed. Equity is hard, but it's essential for us to make change in the lives of those who have been historically depicted as less than. From individuals with disabilities like physical, developmental, and mental, to people living in poverty without access to food or education or healthcare. It's important for us to understand that there is a long history of discrimination, which has created the present day inequities which don't allow these individuals the same access to opportunity than those who don't have those differences. One of the greatest gifts that we give to students that we work with is the opportunity to share their story and to find value in their voice. And this increases awareness and a sense of empowerment.
Thank you. Thank you. I really like that explanation of the difference between equity and equality. So with this in mind, what is the PPN position statement about? Next slide, please. I love this infographic. We can easily find that on the internet, which is a really useful tool to use in training to explain the difference between equality, equity and justice. Next slide, please. So how did the position statement come about? In February 2022, just over a year ago, a number of the regions came together to connect, to think, to share resources, to think about good practice in the space. The group involves assistant psychologists, research assistants, programme managers and chairs. We meet kind of every 6 weeks to think about how we think about the work in this space. And through our conversations, it became apparent that I think we decided we needed to develop a position statement, developing a position paper on EDI and what our approach would be. And I think it's important to highlight this position statement is anchored within the Equality Act in terms of recognising that there are a number of issues for those people who have characteristics identified by the Equality Act that we need to hold in mind and think about how we support and increase and improve access, experience and outcomes for those individuals. In the development of the position statement, not only being, I suppose, anchored in the Equality Act, we were clear that we wanted to draw on trauma-informed principles, acknowledging that oppression, discrimination and marginalisation leads to psychological harm, which can in some cases amount to psychological trauma. But also the work that we do in trying to address issues of othering and discrimination, we also need to make sure that we don't cause further harm and re-traumatise. And so in doing this work around EDI, I think it's really important that we draw on trauma-informed principles. This means that when we are operating in this space, we need to consider how the work is done safely, builds trust, is done collaboratively, and seeks to empower those that have been marginalised. Next slide, please. It felt really important to tell you about the process we went through to come to this position statement. So I think there is something about trying to demonstrate that there was a really thoughtful process which involved many different stakeholders to get to the document that you've seen today or you received last week. In preparation, a group of us reviewed several psychological professional bodies' position statements, which influenced and led to us drafting our own as a PPN position statement. Following that, we had consultation with various stakeholders, including PPN regional teams, experts by experience, a third sector organisation, and an EDI lead on a psychological professions training programme. And in May 2023, the paper was taken to the National Lived Experience Advisory Panel for further consultation on content and accessibility. And finally, it was ratified by the Workforce Core Group, which is senior leaders from the PPN and NHSE colleagues. We feel that the position statement represents the values, stance and commitment of the PPN to progressing and implementing meaningful EDI initiatives. It will inform EDI activities within regional and national work plans, and that is why we've not only called this a position statement, but this is actually a call to action. This is about what do we need to do to bring about change. We need to engage in activity that will make a difference to people's experience of services, but also to the experience of staff, that is, all those aspiring and qualified psychological professionals who have also experienced othering and marginalisation. We know, and research has told us, that a focus on EDI makes a difference to service user experience, staff well-being, effectiveness, efficiency and innovation. So essentially, in my mind, an EDI, and in our mind, EDI matters and is a must-do. Next slide, please. So do the commitments of the position statement. In my presentation, I've decided to organise them into themes. Of course, you may have read them and look at them differently and may decide on a different grouping, but this is just a start for 10. I also think it's worth holding in mind that this is the first iteration of a position statement, which can be reviewed and built upon with input from yourselves, service users, carers, commissioners, professional bodies and other stakeholders. Through the process of conversation and reflection, we can have different generative conversations about how we bring about change. This position statement is steeped in equity and social justice. So my main reflections from this document is the importance of educating ourselves about how oppression and discrimination is manifested within our communities, how minoritised groups are disproportionately impacted, and how the system operates to maintain the status quo. And given that many issues of minoritised and marginalised communities are long-standing, we clearly need to do things very differently to bring about change. And I think Adrian's slides have indicated that a focus and a considered and a deliberate action plan can make a difference. So under the commitments, we have a sense of one of the themes is knowledge and understanding and awareness. We need to consider the impact of difference, oppression and trauma, which disproportionately impact minoritised groups. We need to recognise the harmful impact that has arisen from psychological professions being involved in processes which have contributed to minoritised and marginalised groups being pathologised, and make concerted efforts to listen deeply and repair trust. And we need to acknowledge that the barriers that some groups face to accessing services means that they are less represented in services and less able to offer feedback due to experiences of historical and current marginalisation. Next slide, please. A second theme that I've taken from the commitments is the importance of involvement and inclusion. The importance of authentic and meaningful inclusion and involvement. Let's be clear, involving those who struggle to have their voices heard is often hard to do. Our organisations, in my opinion, our organisations are structured in a way which make them difficult to penetrate if you don't know the rules, rituals and jargon. So I think it's incumbent upon us to ensure that we commit to removing those barriers which exclude. This means that we need to give time to support people to take part. We need to provide resources needed to ensure inclusion and go out into communities having conversations that can make the difference, but also needing to respond to the feedback and what we hear. Too often we gather insights from communities of interest and historically have failed or partially implemented what communities have said. Next slide, please. The other part of involvement inclusion, service users, care and community, is service users, carers and communities, but we also need to think about the involvement and inclusion of our workforce, all those who are training and qualified practitioners from minoritised and marginalised groups who can sometimes often be struggling in work or training through no fault of their own, but more of a reflection of often the racism, homophobia, sexism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, which operate within systems within which the people find themselves. As a profession, we are committed to increasing diversity and widening access, but in doing so, we have to recognise how we support staff in often challenging and sometimes toxic and hostile environments. we need to think about how we support our staff, how we keep them psychologically safe, how we tackle very challenging work environments. So finally, in doing all this work, I think we need to ask the question, who's not in the room? So when we're doing this work around EDI activities, it's really important whose voice is not in the room. Who are we excluding? How can we be more inclusive? What is our work doing to dismantle oppression? Could it be reinforcing it? What action can we take in the direction of inclusivity and belonging? And finally, next slide, please. We need to attend, as Adrian says, to the data. We need to know, is what we are trying to do making a difference to access and experience? And if it is, yes, we are making a difference, I suggest that we do more of it at pace and share the learning. And if it's not making a difference, we need to understand why not and do something different. As psychological practitioners, we need to follow the evidence base, but we should also be contributing to it, understanding what works with regards to EDI activity. Next slide, please. I've included a couple of examples of EDI activity across the region. There's lots of things going on, different things going on in the Southwest. They're keen to increase the diversity of individuals training to be psychological practitioners. They're looking at the drilling down, looking at the data, and thinking about what evidence-based targeted interventions they can do to increase diversity of that psychological population, that workforce. Next slide, please. In the North East, where I'm the chair of the PPN in North Eastern Yorkshire, about a year ago, we started an anti-racism community of practice. The community of practice uses systemic and community-based approaches, such as race-based caucusing, to tackling racial inequality. The group started, I think, in July 2022, and there've been a total of 6 meetings. We've just produced a year 1 report, which has really highlighted significant impact for those attending, both personally and professionally. And if you're interested in finding out more about that group, we've got our session this afternoon, so please join us. Next slide, please. And finally, many of you here may have attended the fantastic Beyond Representation session held by colleagues from the South West and London PPN, which involved authors from the Our Stories project, speaking about the experiences of minoritized aspiring training and qualified clinical psychologists. 192 members attended that session from across the regions. So we know EDI matters. So now we come to the Mentimeter. I know that we released a position statement about, I think, a week ago. So hopefully some of you have time to have a look and see what you think. There were a number of questions. So let's start. Let's see. Do the commitments in the PPN position statement on EDI accord with your values and priorities? Okay, I think we've got yes. I think that's 9 people who responded on the Mentimeter. Which are the most important commitments out of the following? What people said, considering the impact. So first, considering the impact of difference, oppression, trauma and power imbalances in everything we do. Secondly, involve and listen to less heard voices. How do we think about inclusion in the work, in our work? Third, recognise the impacts of psychological professions' involvement in harmful processes. Fourth, consider whether EB involvement is truly representative. Or are these changing or just no? Yeah, more people are contributing to the Mentimeter. And fifth, promote monitoring of demographic data. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, thank you. We'll go away and demographic data. I think data is really important to track effectiveness of our interventions. Okay, still moving. We'll take these away. Next, how might you use the position statement? Choose all that apply. Okay. The most popular so far, to guide activity in my work. And secondly, to guide my professional development. To guide the activity of the PPN in my region in other ways. I don't think we've got a free response. I'm not able to look at those. Thank you. So right, to guide the activity in my work and to guide my professional development. Great. Okay. Okay, that's really helpful. So thank you. So what I would ask finally is that please get involved in your regions with your PPN network. Ask the question about what we are doing around in your regions. Ask the question, what are you doing around, what's your EDI activity? Think about how you can get involved, but also think about, as people here have said, how might you think about EDI in your everyday work and professional development. Thank you for listening. I'm going to hand over to a recording by Professor Margo.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to my part of this morning's conference presentation, which is looking at two pieces of work that I've done for the Psychological Professions Network South East. And I'll begin with looking at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats analysis, followed by the audit tool, and then finishing with a final word from one of the experts by experience who have supported me throughout this project. Let me introduce myself first of all. My name is Margo, and I'm the PPN South East Widening Participation Lead, as well as the Programme Director for the Doctorate in Clinical Psychology Programme. And before I start talking about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats analysis, which from here on in I will use the acronym SWOT, I would also just like to acknowledge the key people who supported me on this project. First and foremost, that's the three experts by experience who have contributed throughout this project and have been given phenomenal feedback and been so helpful and really have made a meaningful contribution to what I'm presenting to you today. I would also like to acknowledge the research assistant, Tessa Thomas, who supported me for 2 years of the project, really being the foundation to putting together the work that I led on. And then there's colleagues at the PPN, as well as my colleagues at the university who I'd like to acknowledge. Thank you, everybody. Before I start my presentation today, I just want to make sure that I talk about self-care. What I'm talking today shouldn't be emotive. It's outcome of findings and various reports and audit tools that can help you with the work ahead. But just in case what I talk about today evokes any feelings related to your own lived experience of discrimination, racism and stigmatisation, please take the time you need to take care of yourself. So, moving on to part one of the talk. So the first part of my talk is to briefly outline the project that I did for the PPN South East. And then I'm going to present the findings of the SWOT analysis and also present some long and short-term actions that trusts can take to ensure and health, higher education establishments can take to make meaningful change in the area of equality, diversity and inclusion. The project itself. So the project began in January 2021 and ended in March 2023. There were several aims and objectives to the project, but the main aim was to try to work out and help the psychological professions become more representative of the communities we've served, so helping the workforce to become more diverse. And diverse was measured by the protected characteristics as defined by the Equality Act, and these are age, religion and spirituality, sexual orientation, disability, race and ethnicity, gender identity, and we added class. Even though it's not a protected characteristic, we felt it was really important from the early stages of our work to ensure that class was included within the aims of making the workforce more diverse. This is three key deliverables that I did on the project. one being the SWOT analysis, second being the audit tool, and the third being a resource bank that I'll talk to you about at the end, which is available to all and will help you all educate yourself on all the protected characteristics under the Equality Act, as well as class. And to begin with, I'm going to present to you the SWOT analysis. And it outlines progress and barriers within the psychological professions affecting workforce development, particularly in the area of diversity. As I said, it's produced in collaboration with experts by experience and also extensive stakeholder consultation. And the overall aim of the report is to provide short-term and long-term recommendations for institutions, and that includes trusts as well as higher educational establishments. So first of all, I'm going to now present to you the strengths. So at the time, Health Education England, recognising the need to widen participation within the psychological workforce, felt like it was a strength because the need was very clear within the workforce, and we had people like Health Education England recognising that and introducing initiatives such as targeted funding to improve representation and inclusion. Another key strength was emerging recognition and momentum for ensuring that there is equivalent diversity in EBEs who provide their expertise and knowledge within a co-production ethos to trusts and HEIs. So not only do our workforce of psychological practitioners need to be diverse, so too do our experts by experience who support the programmes and who support the courses and who support trusts. They should also be recruited with diversity in mind, and we're starting to see that. There were a range of resources available to educate, guide and inform. That was definitely a strength, but accessing them and knowing they were there was a challenge for many. And there's growing awareness and research emerging, focusing on discrimination and the needs for bespoke support. And I've just put an example there. And also, I would definitely like to give a shout out to the amazing work that's done by the variety of networks led by aspiring and qualified psychological professionals from underrepresented backgrounds to support others like themselves. They're often doing this work in their own time without recognition and really making a change to people's lives and the diversity of the workforce. Moving on to weaknesses. There needs to be more targeted recruitments of experts by experience because it feels very much in the early stages of ensuring you've got all the underrepresented groups represented throughout the staff team and the expert by experiences team. As I hinted at in my previous slide, although the strength is that there's lots of good work being done, the communication of this good work, the communication structure within all the big organisations needs to be thought about and across organisations, not just within but across. And also many felt that discrimination reporting processes, the onus was on the individual who's experienced the discrimination to prove, rather than there being a really fair and transparent process for all. Outreach is important, and there was an absence of initiative targeting school-age pupils and university students. And also alongside that, there's a real need for role models to ensure that people can see people who look like them actually are in the profession doing the job. That's one of the things I've learned from being a role model for clinical psychology is I get so many emails from aspiring psychologists who would identify as being from Black and brown communities, that they actually can see they can do what they want to do and be who they want to be within our profession. And that would be great across all the different psychological professions and across the range of the protected characteristics. One key weakness is we recruit like. And it's really important to think about that, and that currently recruitment panels lack training on diversity, lack diversity within the panels, and there really needs to be targeted thought about how the different recruitment panels are put together with a real emphasis on ensuring that protected characteristics are represented on the panels. And meaningful, reasonable adjustments are needed. And at the moment, they're not. And another key weakness for me is that widening participation work can sometimes be seen as an extracurricular activity. The individual's doing it in their own time. It's not recognised within their job specs, and yet their expertise is called on quite a lot. And that really should not be happening, and is a real weakness that's still happening out there today. And another weakness is that psychological professionals from underrepresented backgrounds feel the need to dampen their personality, their appearance, and their culture to appear more employable and to fit into teams. Surely in 2023, we should not be expecting people to dampen down who they are, and that we embrace the different beautifulness that variety in culture and ethnicity and all the protected characteristics bring. So we've seen some of the strengths and we've seen some of the weaknesses. Now let's move on to opportunities. What can we do? What's there? What is available to us potentially? Well, there's opportunity to ensure not only EB involvement from a diverse sort of perspective are integral as part of your workforce, but also those roles are paid. Another key opportunity is that the PPN is in the ideal position to coordinate and host resources and exemplars. And indeed, I'm going to present to you a bit later one such example where the PPN is now hosting resources. If there is any funding or bursaries available, to make sure that it's being targeted for all professions and that a real thought and care is given as to how you advertise any bursaries to ensure that all will be able to hear. Higher education establishments and trust grants should have accountability, including an action plan. So if any funding, targeted funding is made to any trust or university, college, institution, make sure there is an expectation of delivery and a clear action plan that is monitored. And another opportunity is to stop doing voluntary work, which again advantages people who can afford to do voluntary work and disadvantages many who can't. And is there an opportunity for work experience opportunities to be paid? And also considering how long any roles or any jobs should be, because 6 months is not enough for most individuals to gain experience and also to commit to something when perhaps money is tight or they have to send money home. That it should be a fully paid role for a significant period of time, and taking positive action where possible in line with the Quality Act characteristics. Putting together the threat slide, I thought actually there are so many threats, I didn't know where to start. So what I'm going to do is summarise the 4 key threats that we came across. And these are the threats that I really would like trusts and higher education establishments to really be thinking about. And I'm going to present to you some ways, recommendations and tools to take these threats and move them into meaningful action. So the first one is the lack of support, both pastoral and career development. Taking the latter first, the literature is clear that people from minoritised communities are not afforded the same advantages within their career as those from the majority population within that system, which in this case is white British. They're often overlooked, or like I said before, the way they present as their cultural self is actually seen as a threat, and then they're not offered the job. I see things like reverse mentoring, where people from minoritised communities will mentor a senior person within the profession, but what about the other way around? Where's this time come from there to do it? So really thinking about how we can ensure equitable, not advantage, but equitable career development for all. And then thinking about pastoral care and the importance of that. People with lived experience, as I said at the beginning with the note on self-care, will be re-triggered by potential traumas at any point, and they need support networks to know where to take this triggering and how to talk it through, feel supported without having to face micro or macro aggressions. And at the moment, there is a lack of that support and an expectation to get on with the role. Then there's a reality of short-term projects. And indeed, I realised I was part of the problem as I was working on this project. Short-term projects are all well and good, but what happens when that project ends? It falls into the ether, the next thing comes up, and that simply isn't good enough. And so there's a real reality to short-term projects, which makes them almost ineffective, and the need for long-term targeted plans. Another threat is, and this is a contentious one, and you may hold your own view on this, but it's diluting the protected characteristics as defined by the Equality Act by talking about intersectionality. Now, we are all intersectional beings. Of course we are. For example, for those of you who aren't aware what intersectionality is, it's being that we make up different parts of the self. So it could be our gender, our sexuality, all the protected characteristics and more. We may identify with more than one of them. But by talking about things within an intersectional lens, we're forgetting the unique needs of the different protective characteristics. There are some similarities, of course, but there are some differences. And how meaningfully are we doing this if we're looking at the needs to ensure an equitable playing field for all if we're diluting it within an intersectional lens? And I see that as a threat. There's a need for both. And then for me, the real threat within any system is lip service versus commitment to action. There's people who talk the talk, but actually don't walk the walk. And for me, this work needs solid commitment from everybody, not just the EDI lead, not just the brown or black person in the room, or the disabled person, or the neurodiverse person, or whoever it is. If we want to make change in a system as large as the psychological professions, we all need to be committed to doing our part. I just thought I'd bring in Rosa Parks on this bit to make my point, because Rosa Parks is the lady in the States who refused to give up her seat to a white person when asked to do so many years ago. And at the time, it was revolutionary. And now she's got so many meaningful quotes that's inspired me through the work that I had to share this one with you. You must never be fearful about what you are doing when it is right. So what meaningful action can you do that's right? And I must like to stress, these are my recommendations coming out of the SWOT analysis for you to think about. So short-term meaningful actions. Creating those spaces so that staff teams can develop their own awareness and expertise in the host of the Equality Act characteristics, and actually having it in as part of your away day, team building exercises, or whatever you have in your system where groups of people meet, to ensure that there is a meaningful kind of consideration on educating, developing awareness of culture, equality, whatever you want to do, to embrace it. So it's part of a narrative within your system. To focus on recruiting and supporting EBEs from a range of the protected characteristics, and I'll come on to the audit tool a bit later on in the talk. Using the resource bank and audit tool that I'm going to present to you in a moment. I'll keep you waiting for that, but a little taster now that these tools are available on the PPN website. And create reflective spaces for clinicians, supported by a skilled facilitator, at least on a monthly basis, so that people have somewhere to go to talk about their lived experience. And please think carefully about how the groups are comprised. Host open conversation spaces. These spaces just allow staff from all the beautiful range of cultural backgrounds and Equality Act characteristic backgrounds to make meaningful change by talking and learning together. And as I said before, equality, diversity, inclusion is all of our responsibility. So making sure it's on the agenda for meetings, not right at the bottom, not in a tokenistic way, but meaningfully with clear actions, timeframes and reviews for targets that can be supported by the audit tool. That's in the second part of my talk. Long-term actions is to create widening participation lead roles, but with a team ethos. So there's the team of people within the widening participation lead or the equity and diversity lead, don't mind what you call it, that there's more than one person. And that people represent the various aspects of the Equality Act, so that we're all working together and learning together about how to make these meaningful change. To use exemplars like this hosted on the PPN website, such as the audit tool and the resource bank. To ensure staff team have dedicated EDI time in job descriptions, and that's all. I think it should be on everybody's appraisal, a clear goal relating to equity, diversity and inclusion. There should be different responsibilities shared out within a team. We can really all embrace this team ethos. And to create continued professional development opportunities, essentially learning opportunities to develop skills in the area of equity, diversity and inclusion. And again, I've got some educational resources. There's also targeted professional trainings to help people to become more skilled. If there are funded opportunities, apply for them. It really breaks my heart when funded opportunities come out and then certain people decide not to apply, when this could be our chance to actually widen participation. So if we are lucky enough for any targeted funding to come out, please apply for them as a HEI or a trust. To actively ensure that policies and documents are reviewed by a panel representing all the protected characteristics. Really important that there is a consultation model where all the protected characteristics are represented to give that feedback. And to target leadership and career progression, training opportunities to those who identify as being from underrepresented characteristics. Really think about how can we make sure leaders of the future are representative so that we have role models, which will then attract more people because they see more people like them, and so it goes on and on. It's win-win for increasing the rich diversity of our workforce. And to think about any reasonable adjustment that may be required during recruitment, working or training. It may be adjustments related to religious holidays, maybe adjustments related for ability or disability, depending on your preferred term. It may be thinking about when you target your interview days, make sure it's not on a religious holiday. All sorts of reasonable adjustments. And within that as well, to think about remote working and flexible working for those in need. That can include people with health conditions, disability, experts by experience, parents, carers, people who have to send money home or maybe need to be at a certain place to speak to the family, overseas, all sorts of things. That just a little bit of flexibility will help somebody feel valued within your workforce. So that concludes the section where I'm looking at the SWOT analysis. And now I'd like to move on. I've already given you a taster onto the audit tool. So the audit tool was part of the project. And we decided to create this based on the very need that people were saying to us, we don't know what to do. We need to know what to do to increase the diversity. So we thought an audit tool with clear action planning was a good step forward. So the aim of this part of the talk is to present the purpose of the EDI audit tool, describe how to use the tool, and also to introduce the resource bank, which is I'm so proud of, which are tools to enable you all to develop your skills and learning in the area of all the protected characteristics. So the audit tool, first of all. The purpose is for psychological training programs and NHS trusts, and indeed possibly awarding professional bodies as well, to self-evaluate themselves on a quality, diversity and inclusion initiative using a RAG rating scheme of red, amber and green. And from this rating, you create a sustainable action plan with a team ethos. And we got the idea looking at the Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic Positive Practice Guide created by Beck and colleagues. And then we took the idea, expanded it, and with consultation for stakeholders and experts by experience, produced the tool. And going back to my point earlier about the importance of not diluting, what we'd like you to do is to take the tool by protected characteristic. And when you've done one protected characteristic, and you can start with any, wherever you want to target your change, you go again with another, and you go again with another. So there's 3 separate versions of the tool. One for experts by experience. Again, remember, we need to increase the diversity of our colleagues who support us. One for educational environment, training and student support. And one for workforce development and support, which of course will apply for both trusts and educational establishments. There's a standard, so you know exactly what you're looking at, an opportunity to rate yourself, evidence, agreed actions, and agreed timescale. But let me show you what that looks like, operationalise that for you. So this may be small, but I will talk you through it. So there's a standard. So we're currently on the student trainee side of improving access to training. The standard for this one is HEI ensures it has an outreach plan to increase the visibility of a wide range of psychological professions available. And then we've given some examples of presentations at schools and colleges and use of social media. The next step is you RAG rate yourself. Red, not done this at all. No idea. Amber, yeah, we thought about it, but we haven't really done anything. Or green, you have a nice, clear outreach plan and you're actively doing that. Then you move on to evidence it. What are you doing? And then key, red and amber, you describe your action plan moving forward. What key actions do you need to do to move yourselves from a red to an amber or an amber to a green? And you also make sure you've got an agreed timescale. And this tool is available on a link that I'm going to give you in a moment. And you can see there's lots and lots of examples like this where we're clearly telling you what to do in order to make change. So as I said, you create, first of all, you choose the correct version of the audit tool, wherever you're going to target. And then you pick one of the quality act characteristics. And off you go. Red, not integrated. Action plan required. Amber, made a start, but more work ahead. Action plan required. Green, fully integrated, but action required to consider further improvements and how to maintain. And as one university said to me, and I love that, they said they're embracing the reds. They're not seeing the reds as a threat. When they've RAG rated themselves, they're embracing the reds and targeting the action, which is exactly the positive action I want to see with this tool. So given another example here, the standard this time relates to selection. Each interview member must be trained and include people from underrepresented population. The interview question must not discriminate by reason of a protected characteristic and ensure reasonable adjustments are in place. This institution has rated themselves as amber, which means they could do better, but at least they've made a start. Each panel includes at least one interview member from an underrepresented population. Tick, remember we recruit like. And the interview questions have to be reviewed by a diverse panel to ensure it does not directly discriminate. So that needs to be done. Oh, they've been done, sorry. But they haven't done a training yet. Now, I'm not going into the pros and cons of unconscious bias training. There are a host of different trainings out there. But that's why we just said the panel members must be trained, leaving it up to each individual establishment to think about what that looks like. Again, remember, the RAG rating is there to help us all move forward and to embrace the reds, embrace the amber. Clear thing is to ensure it is clear who is responsible for delivering the actions. And also what the timescale is for those agreed actions as well. So for example here, EDI and accessibility lead will arrange an external unconscious bias training for panel members. Interview questions will be reviewed by the Diversity, Equality, Inclusion and Anti-Racism Working Group, which includes several aspiring and qualified psychologists from racially underrepresented backgrounds. And you can see the dates for doing that. And then once you've completed that action plan and your audit tool, you can choose from another area of the underrepresented characteristics and go again, or you can have different team members working on each area. You can really use this tool, and I've left it open so you can add things and take things away to make it fit your system. And we're currently out there piloting it, but it's good for use. Use it. The only thing we're going to do is make it even better following the pilot. So what I will do now is I'm going to pass the final word over to one of our experts by experience, who for the purposes of the talk we will call Paul. and he will tell us his experiences of the audit tool and being part of the project in its entirety. Hello, Paul. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for taking part in the Psychological Professions Network conference, where we're looking at the work we've done together on the audit tool.
Thank you, Margo.
I would like to start by first of all saying a massive thank you, Paul, for the help, advice and input you've given us as a project team to support this initiative. And it really has been phenomenal. So thank you so much.
I would like to just add as well, it was a pleasure and honour to work alongside you and be collaborating alongside you and co-producing as well.
I'm so pleased to hear that. So today we're going to have 3 questions, and if it's okay, we'll start with the first question.
Sure.
So what was it like for you, Paul, to be involved in the Psychological Professions Network project where we devised the audit tool?
To be fair, at first I was a little bit nervous, to say the least, but as the process began to take shape, I found that it was very smooth, very welcoming, very collaborative, very responsive as well, and proactive in the way that it was well managed and organised. There were plenty of times when feedback was given from myself, and it was acted upon instantly. So yeah, I found that it was extremely positive experience to be part of something for the greater good.
Thank you, Paul, for that feedback, because I think that's so important, isn't it? Because when we have experts by experience giving their precious time, that for me it just feels important to be responsive and to enable you to feel heard. So I'm really glad it felt that way for you.
Thank you.
If it's okay, I'll move on to the second question.
Sure.
What actions would you like to see trusts and higher education institutions do to ensure they use the audit tool?
To be fair, from reflection, I'd say to put effective stringency plans in place, such as a 6-monthly or maybe even 3 times a year intervals for the audit tool to be completed. So sort of at the beginning of the year, in the middle of the year, and at the end of the year. And let's not forget in co-production with EBEs such as myself and other EBEs that want to take part and be involved in the processes.
That definitely feels important. So what you're saying is that regular use of the tool, not doing it in a tokenistic way, but also in co-production and really thinking about how to meaningfully involve the experts by experience in this important work.
Precisely.
Thank you. So moving on to the third question. Please could you give one piece of advice for trusts and higher education institutions to increase the diversity of their expert by experience involvement?
I think it goes without saying that we all need to be genuinely and honestly fair about diversity and inclusion. For instance, to promote via CPNs through to consultants for EBE's diversity and inclusion. Currently, I don't see very much representation of the sociological or cultural makeup of the UK within the field or within the profession. And I think it's very important to also recollect that sociology goes hand in hand with psychology as well. So we need to connect the two together at some point and come to the realization that that's the only way to progress.
I think that's really important, sort of recognising that psychology doesn't sit alone and that we've got to consider the socio impact as well. And that I agree, they absolutely do go hand in hand. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Paul, for talking about your experience of the project, and I'm delighted that you found it a place where you were supported, valued, because we couldn't have done it without you and your colleagues support us as they did. So the final part I'm just going to present to you today is, for me, the most exciting, important part, which is the resource bank, the opportunity for us all to learn, grow and develop in relation to the protected characteristics. And it is hosted on the PPN website and will continue to be. And it's an ongoing resource to aid personal development, inform the workforce, all sorts of things you can use it for. And here's the link. So if you put in PPN EDI Resource Bank into your search engine or click on the link, you'll be presented with a whole host of resources by protected characteristics that range from podcasts to government legislation to different support groups to fun activities. There's all sorts of things on there. It was released in May and we've had huge positive feedback, some lovely feedback the other day from a clinician who said that they just had the best 14 minutes of their day just sitting and flicking through the resource bank and educating themselves. And that was so lovely to see, because that was the whole point of the resource bank. So do take a look. Remember, it's PPN EDI Resource Bank, or you can use the link that's here and you will get that information. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen to me and Paul today. And I would just like you to take one moment for reflection. And because the importance of, remember, taking action, what meaningful action are you going to take from today? Please jot it down, send yourself an email, put it in your phone as a reminder. But remember, we're all responsible for making change. And I use the acronym chipping away at the marble. The marble is all the discrimination, all the oppression, all that's within systems that means we don't currently have an equitable playing field is represented in my eyes as this big piece of black marble. And we all want to chip away at it with meaningful action. So what is yours? Thank you so much, everybody. And hopefully now I'll be able to join in person to take any questions.
Thank you, Margo. Absolutely brilliant to hear about all of this amazing work that we can all tap into. This is just it's slightly mind-blowing, but just wonderful. So just circling back to all the things we've heard this morning, just a huge thank you to Sharon for sharing the statement and thinking about the commitments that we can make, and all of that wonderful resource and material for Margo, Paul and their colleagues that have collected for us. So just thinking about, it's your turn. Those of you that are engaging, thank you so much for all the interesting comments and reflections in the Q&A and the chat that we're seeing. This is wonderful. So we wanted to begin this section of engagement with thinking about how we share our commitments. So if you recall that Sharon was talking about how important it is to have a dialogue in this area, particularly how might we move the dial and share our commitments together. So I'm going to just move back to the panel, if I may, to invite them to start us off with some commitments, hopefully starting with Adrian and then moving to Sharon for her. So Adrian, would you be able to share your commitment in this area with us?
Yeah, I happily will. Thank you. And thanks, Estelle, for hosting this sort of Q&A session. Actually, before I describe my commitment, I'd like to invite everyone in the audience, if they would like to just post their commitment. So Margo invited a sort of moment of reflection there about a meaningful action. If you've thought of one that you'd like to share, then please do post it into the Q&A, because we'd love to hear what those are. But my commitment, based on today's session, which I think has been very rich, will be to continue to work to embed the PPN position statement across the work of all of the psychological professions networks in the 7 regions. So specifically, we'll be asking each of the PPNs to review the position statement within their workforce council and come up with some meaningful action based on that position. And in relation to the audit tool and the resource bank, I'll commit to absolutely promoting those across the country. They're already there on the website, but what we know from previous work of the similar nature within NHS talking therapies is it's only through relentless continued promotion, lots of voices, that we'll get there. So I'll be one of those voices, and obviously from a leadership position able to sort of help drive that. And so I'm absolutely committed to doing so.
Wonderful. Thank you, Adrian. That's a wonderful start. Can we move to Sharon for a commitment and then to Margo?
My commitment, thank you. My commitment is to continue supporting and learning from our anti-racism community practice in the North East Yorkshire. So we've had a year. I think we've got another year to run, to think about quite an innovative project in the North East, really. How can we think about taking the learning across the regions, really? And the other thing, I suppose, hot off the press, we had our Workforce Council meeting yesterday in North East Yorkshire. And in that Workforce Council meeting, we talked about the PCREF, the Patient Care Race Equality Framework, and how we as a PPN in North East Yorkshire can think about how we think about the implementation of the PCREF and take that back, and the PCREF back into our services, that conversation about race equity in mental health services. So we are, I think, as a council, and I've said it live now in this conference, are committing to do a baseline audit where we see the relevance, really, and that feels meaningful. So maybe I've snuck in another one there, but this is a really important agenda for all of us now at the moment. Thank you.
Brilliant, Sharon. Thank you. Perhaps we can add to that the reference of the PCREF into the Q&A for people to be able to do similarly in their regions. Thanks, Sharon. And so moving to Margo and then to Paul.
Hi, thanks, Estelle. I think, well, my commitments are many, so I was trying to pick the one that really felt like important within the ethos of today. And I think for me, it's continuing to campaign for services and higher education establishments and anybody I can, really, to take meaningful action to ensuring more equity, and that people are truly doing that. And I do it in a really professional but blunt and open way, and I'm going to continue to say what needs to be said to make changes in our community. I think that's my main commitment.
Thank you, Margo. Listening loud and clear. Thank you so much. Can we move to Paul for your commitments?
Certainly, thank you. I would say mine would be to continue vocalizing my intersectionality in a eloquent and accepting mannerism as well. So as accepting other intersectionalities and being open-minded about other intersectionalities in my work that I do towards as the EBE-EDI representative for the South East.
Thank you, Paul. That's brilliant. So I'm wondering if I ought to add one too, and I think I would like to say that I'm on an early stage of my learning journey. So I think in all of this work, I want to try and keep my ears open and continue to listen and to continue to welcome difference and promote fairness. Those are the things that I would like to do personally, and that I think would enable me to help my region too to do that. I'm mindful that there are some wonderful commitments arriving in the Q&A, or in the, presumably that all can see. So somebody saying here, I will commit to protecting time to engage with the PPN resources shared today. That's, I'm sure, music to Margo and Paul's ears. To get my head around them and decide where they can be applied within my context. That's wonderful news. We'll also disseminate to colleagues, and I think that is a wonderful thing. To have a resource bank that can be shared is fantastic. That's brilliant. Thank you so much to the person that committed to posted that. So another commitment is to be using the and promoting the audit tool and the resource bank in all my EBE work. So there's the EBE's Experts by Experience inspired by what's been said this morning, which is brilliant to see. Another colleague is hoping to speak with the lead psychologist and discuss how we can put EDI on the agenda. So that's fantastic, mobilising voices and using the audit tool. Amazing. Okay, so we've got it's with the commitments and fueling us. Perhaps we can return also to some of the questions and the comments that we saw in the chat as we were hearing all about all of those things this morning. So I wonder if we can make a beginning with that, with just coming back to a point that was made by Mo Rawat about the pool of undergraduates and Black and ethnic minority undergraduates. Maybe the fact that we're losing some of them into other professions. So I wonder if I could invite Margo just to comment back on Mo's observation there.
Yes, and thank you, Mo, for that observation, because it's so true. And I think it's so important that outreach work is undertaken by particularly educational establishments. And indeed, I'm meeting with my own school in the University of Southampton to ensure we have a detailed, comprehensive outreach strategy to ensure that we really communicate what's available within all areas, using role models as part of that, so people can see people like them or people they identify with can be successful in their careers. So I would urge anybody who has that power in the audience to make sure they are thinking about tapping into the brilliant people we have in coming through schools, coming through colleges, coming through universities, who probably have no idea that this role could be ideal for them. So important that we make sure each and every person is aware of the opportunities that's there. And I know the PPN has a lovely tool, which I'll ask Indy to put in the chat, which educates people around what you need for each part of the career framework should you want to become a psychologist in any shape or format. And I think that is a great thing to share initially around where you can, and I'll certainly have a look for that careers map link now.
Thank you, Margo. So that's really helpful. So whatever we can share is that's our goal. So do keep having a look at the at all the materials available, and particularly perhaps going back to that resource bank. So another question that had arrived in the chat, which is there's maybe two parts to the question, a really important question, stimulated, I think, partly by some of the work that Margo was describing in engaging and beginning to have conversations, and thinking about minoritized groups in our psychological professions. So a question for all the panel, and we'll go around, was about how do we start addressing the experience of minoritized groups, both in training and as psychological practitioners in services. So it's maybe a double part question, because we're thinking both about training and the experience of being in services. But how do we start addressing the experience of minoritized groups? I'm going to start with come to Adrian and then come to Sharon. To Adrian.
Thanks, Estelle. Wow, I mean, it's a massive challenge, isn't it? And it's very easy to sort of show a few stats about representation, and that really doesn't show us what's happening with that sort of meaningful participation and inclusion and people's experience across all different parts of working in health and care. So we need whole system change, and that is, of course, urgent, but also challenging and may require our long-term commitment. I think the only way we can get there is through a sort of focused attention to the issues based on evidence as to what those specific issues are and how best they're tackled. So we'll need, for example, to do things like ensure that supervisors and trainers are all very well educated in inclusivity and tackling problems with inclusion. We'll need to make sure that we have the right leadership across our institutions that know about how to take this agenda forward. We'll need to review our curricula. We'll need to ensure that systemic problems in our recruitment processes are removed. So it's a massive programme of change. I think we can make progress, though, and I think we're showing some progress. We need to make a lot more. We can probably do our best here by working together with others. So it's working together across the psychological professions as a sort of unit. So let's not break into all our separate little fractional parts. We have 21 occupations. Let's work together across them to maximise the benefit. But it's also working with other groups within health and care, other professional groups with experts by experience, with managers, to support with implementing great initiatives like the Patient and Carer Race Equality Framework, the Workforce Race Equality Standard. These are tools that we can use to help us drive this all forward. But in doing so, I think we're going to need some, and this is wording from the position statement actually, which I really like, some brave conversations, because it's not always straightforward how to take this action. And we may have differences of view that need to be sort of outed and discussed. And it's really important, I think, that we can have those honest and brave conversations to work out how we can take that path together.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adrian.
So I don't know how you follow. I don't know how you follow that.
I was thinking exactly the same.
You know, I was thinking, but looking at my notes, I think I absolutely agree with Adrian. It's a whole systems response to this, and I think it's having a kind of, for me, kind of a short-term, medium-term, long-term action plan. It's like turning a bit of a tanker, I think. So we just need to kind of keep our eye on the prize, really, which is about really diverse and having a really diverse and inclusive workforce. I think there is something for me, though, in terms of, I think about the safe spaces and brave spaces for practitioners. I think there are practitioners which share those kind of characteristics, need some spaces they can be and have conversations. And I think it's incumbent upon courses to provide that, but also provider organisations where people are training. I think people are training and doing placements in the real world where there are can be lots of systemic issues, and there is something about how we support training aspiring psychological practitioners, but also qualified professionals to navigate those spaces. There's a whole load of work going on, but we're certainly not there yet. And there is something about how we protect staff and service users to kind of get through the course, qualify and operate in can really be sometimes really challenging environments. And so there is that whole systems thing, which is, whilst we're focusing on training, we also need to focus on our workforce and our organisations and make them much safer places to be, more diverse, more inclusive spaces. So that would be kind of my reflection with my CPPO hat on.
Thank you so much, Sharon. So just thinking about, the expert by experience voice, can I turn to Paul for your thoughts? So how might we start addressing the experience of minoritized groups?
I think I agree with Adrian as well. However, if we were to take the EDI tool into consideration, I'd say the use of the EDI tool would be perfect to start and continue that throughout Transcendence through the PPN network, as well as, to be honest, take into consideration what is intersectionality. It's the way in which multiple identities and forms of discrimination, e.g. racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, combine and overlap, particularly for individuals from marginalized populations. If we take that into consideration and we're faithful towards having those uncomfortable conversations and being faithful towards what we find in relation to addressing them appropriately, I think we will be making a very positive start to the progress.
Thank you, Paul. Wonderful. Finally, Margo, for a very quick wind up, and then back to Adrian for the rest of the PP week.
Very quickly, just to add, I completely agree with what all my colleagues have said on the panel, but for me as well, research is important, and I'm seeing a lot more research. Indeed, I'm conducting more research as well to really get the message out there. And indeed, the research is actually being published, which was another block. Actually getting research published within the publication system was also challenging, and that is breathing out a little bit, and publications being made. So research would also be my point to add, so we know what's going on.
Wonderful.
Wow, well, fantastic. Thank you very much, Estelle, and the whole panel. And I just really want to say thank you to everyone who's presented today, for your contributions, everyone who's been part of the session and asked questions or made comments. It's been incredibly valuable, and also to the whole team behind the scenes who've absolutely nailed it. So thank you very much. It's been a great start to Psychological Professions Week. There are many other excellent sessions that I think you'll find through the week if you go to the programme. And I'm just pointing out a couple that are particularly focused on EDI issues. So there's this afternoon at 1:30, Sharon's group that's developed the anti-racism community practice in the North East. We'll be presenting on that. And then tomorrow morning from the South East, we have how can the psychological professions best serve the LGBTQIA+ community. So really endorse and recommend those sessions to you. Hope to see you across many sessions through the week. And thank you for joining us today.